basis. We need to try to reiterate that Mr. White stated that he's going to try, since he's on the board, to try to integrate in God we trust back into in our schools, which is a notable thing. But that should be our head of our life. God should be first and foremost in all that we do. And again, we got issues right now with Okaloosa County School Board. If we only would have followed godly principles, we wouldn't have some of the issues that we have. You know, if you're wrong, ask for forgiveness. And if you're right, just stand on your right principles. And again, God is first and foremost in all that I do. And if I get a chance to serve on your school board, I pray that I get your votes, that I will promise you that I will seek God first in every decision that I make and every question that I'm asked on the board. So thank you for your time, and that's my introduction. My name is Willie Harmon. I'd like to get your vote for 2018 of August. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
You know, it's a hard act to follow, these two fellas, okay? I want to tell you, first off, I don't need glasses yet. I've got some notes I'm going to be reading. You know, it's faith, family, and flag in that order for me. It's on my signs. It's been, I guess it's my mantra for years. I want to tell you that I think that this country was founded on a Lord. And those men prayed before they made all the decisions that we now refer to as the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, even the Articles of Confederation that came right before that. They prayed. And even today in our Congress and the Senate, they pray. They pray. And we need to pray, and we need to ask the Lord to lead us in everything that we do. You know, I was raised by a very strong mom, very strong. I'm one of 10 children that she actually gave birth to, and 27 total that she raised. She raised kids that were foster kids. My mother was in the foster kid program from the church. And it wasn't like it is now where you go through all the red tape and they make you jump through hoops. Somebody in the church needed somebody to raise these kids, and they raised them. My mother raised my brother Terry, and Terry was killed in Vietnam, and in his funeral, I actually learned he was 2.5 years older than me, and I had a brother in between, Charlie, that's already passed away. But I learned then that Terry really wasn't my birth brother. Until that time when he was killed, I learned that he had been born of another woman. I was raised by a strong Nazarene mama and a daddy that was a Baptist. And I was telling one lady, they referred to me growing up as a Baptist-costal. And so that's my little term that I use. But, you know, I did not follow the Lord until I was 40 years old. And at age 40, some very traumatic things happened in my life. And I realized not only do I need the Lord, I wanted the Lord in my life. And so I accepted the Lord in 1989 as a 40-year-old man. And I started working toward that and doing the things I needed to do. Now, I've got the education. I've got a bachelor's degree from Western Kentucky University. I've got a master's degree in special education. I've got a specialist degree in policy and curriculum. And I've got a doctorate degree in developmental therapy for special needs kids. So I've got the credentials. But you know what really makes me what I am is I'm a chaplain. And I was a chaplain at the jail, and I'm a chaplain in the Florida Baptist Association Disaster Relief. And I've done Katrina, and I've done Harvey and been involved in that. The Lord has blessed me with these opportunities to witness to people. We need to keep it in our schools. And yes, the Lord has a place in my life.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. I want to thank you all for giving your time up tonight. That shows your interest and care in our public school system, and that means a lot to me. I'm Linda Ivanchek. I'm running for school board for District 3. I've used the mantra through my campaign, Okaloosa educated, Okaloosa dedicated. And I could have added Okaloosa churched. It doesn't have the great alliteration as the other two, but I grew up as going to church. As a matter of fact, I attended this church as a young teenager and was part of the Girls Auxiliary, the GAs. And I remember getting all those little badges and going up the thing. I remember I was the first girl to pass 2 steps in a year. and came to the little coronation and everything. I also received the Lord through a revival that this church had. Now, this is back in 60 something and and all that, but it has great memories for me. I now attend another church, but the Lord has been in my life since I was a child, and that came from my parents. You know, I do believe that, our nation was founded on Christian principles, and I think that we maybe have strayed a little bit, but we're still going to be there, and we need to make sure that they're in our public school system. Our Lord Jesus Christ was a teacher. And now I have been a teacher for 38 years. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not doing any kind of comparison, but I'm just saying that, I loved reading about the life of the Lord as a teacher, because I think being a teacher is such a valuable position in our society. I tried to model my values, because one of the things I saw with Jesus is that he was so patient, and that was probably something that I never mastered, because it's frustrating, more impatient with myself. But yeah, the Lord was a teacher, and I think it's such an important situation. As a teacher, I try to emulate Christian values every day. I think that it's most important, the way you show yourself. I didn't necessarily stand up and say it every day, but my students knew what my principles were. And as a school board member, it will be the same thing. The way I conduct myself will be able to show people my Christian values. I think you want a candidate, a person on the board who has character, credentials, and commitment. And tonight I'll be speaking on all those so that you can see that I will do my best as a member of the Okaloosa County School Board. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. I am Dr. Diane Kelly, and I am your experienced choice for school board in District 5. But before we have opportunity to talk about ourselves in detail, it is my honor to answer Reverend Sanson's questions. Some of you in the audience know me now, but many of you do not. I'll tell you just a little bit about my background. I feel like I truly had the most blessed upbringing in this world, because I was literally raised on a farm. Some people joke about that, but it's true. My dad, when he got out of the military, worked at Eglin and worked the farm, so we got a very stringent work ethic out there on the farm. But I was very fortunate that I had a set of grandparents who lived in Mobile. So every summer, my sister and I got to go spend a few weeks in the big city. So I learned what life was like in both environments. My grandfather, some of you have told me passed away some time ago, but he was Reverend Cecil A. Walker, and he pastored in many of the smaller churches around our area. And every time he pastored, for some reason, the pianist would fall out, and I would become the de facto pianist of the church and Sunday school teacher. So therefore, I ended up being Sunday school teacher and classroom teacher to many of our young people that are my supporters today. My father was a deacon and my mother was a Sunday school teacher. So from an early age, I learned the golden rule as expressed in Matthew 7:12. Of course, we all know that. So whatever you wish to be done unto you, do so unto others. My little sister, was 18 months younger than I, so you might understand that sometimes there were a few conflicts where that principle came into play when we would argue over who was going to use the phone or who would get to drive the car, and that was before the age of cell phone, of course. Another verse I committed to memory early on was Proverbs 16:3. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. My parents and my grandparents believed in Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So often and early, my sister and I were told that as we were put to bed with either a Bible story or a beloved hymn. And these words didn't just resonate in our home. I've tried awfully hard in my professional life to set a good example for the many young people that I've had in my classrooms across the district, and certainly when I was principal in 3 of our schools. While I am well versed in the separation of church and state, I believe I've been able to conduct myself in such a way and to speak and interact with our young people and their families so that they know of my foundation of faith and where my heart is for them and for their future. I hope when this election is over, I can say, as 2 Timothy, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, and I have kept my faith. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Brand McAllister. I'm a retired military officer, leader, and commander, engineer, mathematician, industry executive, and university instructor. I've been a practitioner and a teacher of strategic leadership and problem solving. Been a resident of Okaloosa County for 30 years, and during that time I've had extensive experience in our school system as a volunteer, student mentor, varsity coach, SAC member, Booster Club president, member of the district's Career Technical Education Advisory Council, and frequent advisor alongside school administrators in various assessments and activities. I've been a candidate for almost a year, and I've attended every school board workshop and meeting over that time. I've established a rapport with administrators, principals, teachers, and board members that's been very useful for my growth in understanding our school system. Early in life, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And every day, I think about what we say in our church every Sunday during our Holy Eucharist. And I'll quote that. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. The significance of that passage for me, other than we recite it every Sunday, is that I live my life and serve my community and the nation with those thoughts in mind. Those thoughts provide a very simple guide for my actions, capturing the essence of Scripture and the Lord's principles such that if followed, I will do the right thing in every decision that I make. Now, we have a fine school district, and we all wish to keep it that way. But sustaining the excellence for all 32,000 students throughout the county, all walks of life, and keeping those kids safe is not possible over the long term unless we address systemic strategic issues such as growth and infrastructure, unsecure campuses, and a lack of mental health services. These are issues that can be solved by a school board comprised of people with experience at solving strategic issues in large organizations. But it requires people with demonstrated integrity who consider always the fundamental beliefs upon which all our laws and decisions are based, and who act honorably, speaking the truth at all times, keeping foremost in their minds whom we serve, and above all, electing candidates who don't simply talk about it, but live a life of honor first and the most important step in ensuring that we do the right thing. I've been faithful to the many oaths of office I've taken and to my vows of marriage. I've been faithful to my God, my country, and my family. And tonight I look forward to talking to you more about how my experience, and most importantly, my beliefs, will restore your faith and trust in our school district leadership.
Thank you, sir. All right, we will now open the mic up to our audience. So if you have a question, if you would just raise your hand, and Mike will make his way to you. Yes, okay. When you, if you don't mind, just give your name and kind of where you're from, and then just give your.
I'm Beverly Holmes, and I live in Blue Water, live in Niceville, and I know a couple of the candidates actually through my teaching. I'm a professor at Northwest Florida State College, so I actually know some of the people up there. So my question is not one of the ones on here, if that's okay. I find these questions here kind of more appropriate for people running for a religious school head, maybe not a secular public school. So I have another question that's not really on here. I would like to ask about the school starting times, especially for high school. You know, the high school starts so early here. What is it, 6:55 or something? It's before 7. Kids are at the bus at 6:05 a lot of times. And as you know, the circadian rhythms and all the things about teenagers show that later times are much better for them as far as academics and behavior. I think Dr. Keefe was working on that a couple years ago. So I'd like to ask about your position with the high school, secondary school starting times, if you think that there should be a change or what you think about that issue.
All right. And you're directing this question to all the candidates. Okay. All right. So what we'll do is Mr. Harmon, we'll start with you, and then we'll just move this way, and Dr. White will be the last. So, oh, by the way, you have 2 minutes. So,
that you actually asked, I'd like to say that these things that's on this form, though, are appropriate questions for our local school system at this time. But the start time, that's something that's been in existence for the last 10 or 15 years. Florida State College, a lot of colleges have made a profound statement when you said statistics has shown that the later school start, kids' brains will function better. But it has been in play for the last 10 to 15 years, and it has not changed yet. I don't sit on the board at this time, but I would always try to go by what's best for the student if a decision had to be made on start time. But later start time is a scientific study that it is better for students to start late. But again, back to your original question, that's been a question that's been asked for the last 15, 20 years, but it has not changed at this time. So I don't know if it would be changed, but if it's presented to me, if I'm on the board, I will most definitely consider that as a possibility. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Dr. Slusser?
Is it on?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
I know Dr. Lynn Keith that she referred to in start schools later, and that was one. And 4 years ago when I ran against Mr. Walker, that was one of the hottest topics that we talked about. Also, the late starts and early starts of school and the days that they had half days, and of course Mr. Lamar White, Dr. White, and others have worked to have that changed. I thought about it for a long time, and some of the things that's come up with that is when you try to start school later, it would be better for the children in circadian rhythms and stuff, and you're correct about that. Because a lot of the students don't go to bed till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and if they have to get up at 5 or 5:15 in the morning to catch a bus to get to school, they're deprived of sleep, and they're not going to be at their best in the early hours of the day. But the situation is, it's a budgetary thing. When you have to have more buses, because right now they're trying to shift the buses. They use the same amount of buses that we have, and the bus drivers, the fleet is not big enough to have all of these schools start later. So they have to have this, the high school starting at one time and the middle school nearby and the elementary. So it's a budgetary problem that they have. And of course, I'm not on the board either, but I've looked into this. The bus drivers, the parents, the kids, they would rather have school start later, I'm sure. And back in the days when I was in school, back when Fred and Barney and Wilma and I went to school, if you young people, I'm referring to the Flintstones. I didn't go to school until 8 or 8:15, but in my junior senior year, we had split shifts, and I had to be at school at 6:15 in the morning to 1:45 because they had 2 double shifts. I was miserable my junior and senior year in school. So I'm in favor of school starting later also, but there are budgetary constraints to that. Thank you.
Hi, Beverly. How you doing? Good. Okay. Having been a high school teacher for all these years and working with the system of starting at 7 a.m., I've seen the parts and the top of the head of a lot of students, first period. So I know the struggle of that, but it's a very complex situation. And Dr. Slusser talked about this bus system, but it's not only the buses, but I'm sure you've seen those yellow buses with signs that say, we need drivers. Right now, we have a shortage of drivers. We can't keep the staff to work out that system. The other thing I think about is I don't think people realize how many of our students have to work, not just so they can have, date money or something, but they're working. So what are they doing? They're closing down the burger barns, as I call it, out there, so they have to work. If they can't get to work till later, it takes money out of their pockets. So that's something we need to look at too. Okaloosa County is one of the few districts left that does a 7-period day, okay? With having that, we allow the students, the high school students, to take a no class first or 7th period. So a student that finds it particularly difficult to come early could take that first period off, and that's something. I'm not totally against changing it. My concern is that the plans I've seen moved it to 9 o'clock, and I think that's way too late. Within, say, 30 minutes to, say, 7:30, possibly 8 o'clock, I would go with that, and I would make that a good compromise. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, that is an excellent question, and it is a hot topic about school start times. Let me just tell you how much I know about that issue. I have watched Dr. Lynn Keefe give her presentation for probably the last 8 to 10 years, I would say, and I've learned more and more about it as we've gotten deeper into the conversation. My last school was a late start school. I've also been principal at an early start school, and then I had one that kind of split the difference in the middle, because I was principal at Laurel Hill K-12, at Bruner Middle, and at Destin Middle, where we were a late start. So I have seen all the ramifications of all the different start times firsthand, up close and personal. And Ms. Holmes and I had a sidebar conversation earlier, so I think she knows where I'm coming from. But in all things that I will consider, I will look at the 3 C's: care for every student, communication, wide communication, particularly with parents, and consistency of how we apply every decision that we make. But relevant to this issue, what we're looking at often in our conversations and in the research that I first learned about through Dr. Keefe, it was a static 9 o'clock start time that we were pushing for, or that was pushed by that movement. But in recent times, the information she has sent me in my recent conversation with Dr. Keefe and Lamar Connerly, who's an attorney in Destin and whose student went through Destin Middle School, they've assured me that they are not talking about a static 9 o'clock, but maybe 8:40 or 8:45. In addition, we need to poll the parents. We need to look at the drivers and the buses, but we also need to look at secondary students and their self-constraint. We need to be sure that our parents are teaching them that if we release that time, that they're not using it to be on their devices, but rather to really go to bed and go to sleep and use the time for the purpose that it's set for. I do know about our buses. We have gotten 34 buses from Escambia County, and I'll stop because my time is gone. But I think I've answered the question for you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I've had several conversations one-on-one and in groups with Dr. Keefe, and I've done some research on my own, and I'm convinced that there is some good evidence that our high school students might benefit from later school start times. But I'm also aware that there's significant resistance among many different constituents and stakeholders. Concerns have been raised about transportation. We've heard that already. We have concerns about extracurricular activities. Child care and working teens are concerns, and there are others. And a change of this nature wouldn't just affect schools, it would affect virtually everyone in the school system and the community. So that's significant. So my view is that the right way to handle a problem like this, and it's a great opportunity to talk about my vision for how we handle problems like this, is through a thorough and honest review. And what I'm suggesting is that the school board, having the authority to appoint committees and workshops under its own policies, this would be the perfect opportunity to get together the right people in a room like this and allow people to express either their support for such a change or their options for such a change or their concerns about a change, so that everybody gets to hear from everybody else who has a stake in the outcome. That's the proper way to solve very challenging problems. It's the way I've solved problems for my entire adult life. And what I've found is that when you solve problems collaboratively with all the right stakeholders in the room, through consensus and understanding and empathy, we can arrive at a solution which satisfies most everybody's concerns. And I think if we did that, we're obviously not going to change anything this school year, but if we were to embark upon a process of a collaborative attempt to get stakeholders in the room and discuss this issue honestly and objectively, I believe we could come to some arrangement which would satisfy almost every stakeholder's concerns, and we might get to a solution where we can shift start times a little later and yet not upset everybody else who has a various stake in the outcome. And that's the way I would attack this problem.
Thank you. Dr. White?
I think what you're asking is what's the sentiment of the various candidates regarding that particular proposal for later start time. I will tell you that I've reviewed the evidence both for and, by the way, against, and I find that evidence very compelling. In terms of school board governance, I think what these candidates will all find, and what I know from my experience, is that we await a recommendation from the superintendent to act. That's how school boards do business, is based upon the recommendations of the superintendent. And I'm telling you that I would be inclined to be in favor of such a motion should she bring forth a plan to do that. I would like to take the rest of my time, though, to speak regarding something that my opponent, Mr. Harmon, has said tonight in this forum. I want to reiterate that the school board is held in high regard, high esteem by every written report, by the Okaloosa Grand Jury, the Okaloosa Sheriff's Department's investigation, the League of Women Voters, and the local news media. Nowhere is the school board implicated in any aspect of the school district's troubles. In fact, under my leadership, the school board is the only entity that has moved forward tangible remedies and strong corrective actions. I was the school board member that brought strong corrective actions forward to reinforce the public's trust of the school board and the school district. Informed citizens know from media accounts that I am the school board member that publicly identified on video the failure of the school district to inform the school board of confirming employee investigations prior to school board votes to transfer these employees. These videos are online, and you can take a look at them anytime. My website, electlamarwhite.com, and I just felt like I wanted you folks to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let me just say real quickly, since the question came up, about some of the questions on in our program and why some of them were there. In the past, most of these questions came from a questionnaire that we, in the past, sent to every candidate. And what we decided this time was, rather than send you a questionnaire, to actually make these questions available to people in the audience if they wanted to ask them. We know that that none of you will make any policy about abortion, or you're not going to make any policy about same-sex marriage or anything like that. The reason we ask those questions of you is basically your answer, and we trust you to give an honest answer, tells us something about your core values and your worldview. And for Christian voters, that's important. That's as important to us as your qualifications, your educational background. And so that's the reason for asking those questions. And certainly we want you to know that you're free to ask any question of these candidates. You don't have to go by these suggested questions. So thank you. Just thank you for that. All right. Anyone else have a question? Okay.
Yes. I'm Bob Reddy from Fort Walton Beach. I'm concerned about school safety in light of the school shootings and things we have. Do you have any suggestions of how we might make our schools safer in that regard?
All right. Yes, Dr. Slessor, we'll begin with you.
I think that's my rotation to start first. If you look at my literature in 2012, I've written a book on safe and secure schools, a plan for safer schools. And you know, this has really came up many times before the Parkland tragedy we've had. We've had so many things happen. Literally thousands of people have been shot in schools and killed. But when it's one or two children here and there, it doesn't get the publicity. So I just wanted to say that ahead of time. But you know, we need to have, I was at the American Legion when we had one of our forums there, and someone stood up and said, we need fences. Well, you know, that's pretty close to being exactly what we need. We need to have protective areas around to make the building, the grounds more secure. Safety's with inside the building, security's protecting from the outside. And then when we get inside, have one access into the buildings, one access into the parking lots, and the cars should be parked further away from the doors. When you get into a lobby, that lobby should be a secured lobby that when someone comes in, they have to present an ID. All the glass in there, there's no way going into the rest of the building. All the glass is protective glass. And, you know, like you have in a bank, when the thing comes out and you can put your ID down there, they can scan it. And if somebody's going to pick up their grandchild or their child to take them to a dental appointment, doctor appointment, or come to for a teacher meeting, it needs to be ahead of time arranged for our protection and the protection of all the teachers, the staff, and especially our children. If we do these things, and we have the SROs, which are fantastic, and we do what we need to do, we can make our schools safer. The sheriff's posse, I have two neighbor friends of mine who are in the posse. They said there's about 37 to 40 people that would volunteer to work at the school, and they are trained. They are trained to help out watching the schools. We need to make our schools safer. Thank you.
Okay. I think there's some other things we need to be doing in addition to the hardening of the schools. Certainly, you know, most of our schools in Okaloosa County are aging, and they were built at a time when we weren't concerned with the security issues we have now. And it's going to take a lot to work with that infrastructure to do, as Dr. Slessor said, to, quote, harden them. But there's some other issues we need to get to. First of all, we need to be looking at some mental health issues. It's a problem that we've had in our community that we really haven't addressed. And as teachers, we need to look at that. We are getting some mental health counselors in our schools, and I'm very much in favor of that because we need to be working with these students. You know, sometimes the problem starts inside the school. It's not a stranger coming to the school. In addition, we need a cultural change within our classrooms, in our schools with our students. We have to start that by talking with the students, eliciting their help and their input. I like to see something, some kind of, quote, hotline that would be a hybrid between the crisis line we have and Crime Stoppers, where students who are either having a concern about themselves or another student could call anonymously and we could work with them. I think we need, it's not going to be a one, size fits all approach that's going to help us keep our students safe. And we need to look at a variety of things. Yes.
Okay. Ms. Kelly?
Seems like our 2 minutes go by too quickly. Well, with regard to that, it's Senate Bill 7026, which is the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act, which really gave us the parameters within which we'll be working this coming year, that gave us the money for the hardening of schools, which really is interpreted to mean the single point of entry. And in our somewhat 40 schools, we have only a handful that currently have that single point of entry. That same bill allows us to have the Guardian program, which in my view, in conjunction with the professionals that our school district partners with and contracts with, the SRO and the Sheriff's Department, I believe that they should be our first contact because we do have a contract with them and we entrust them already with the safety of our schools. The Guardian program would allow us to potentially train others. I think that needs to be looked at very closely. And if we do go with that, there is an exemption in the law if you read it closely. People who are full-time instructors should not be armed. I don't go along with that at all. But if you have, for instance, we do have, maybe you know, an Olympian sharpshooter on our staffs in our schools. And I would be quite happy if she had my back in one of my schools if I were still a school principal. But those kind of people would be just fine. Some of the money could be used for additional SROs, and certainly we have already hired, you'll be happy to know, with that mental health funding, 12 mental health professionals in our schools, but I also want to do some creative solutions and problem solving. For instance, the use of drones outfitted with cameras to feed that signal back to the existing security systems in our schools, and following after the drug dog model to spot check with a metal wand detector. So there are things we can do that won't be that costly that we can do to help our school safety issues. It's also a symbiotic relationship with the infrastructure needs, but we'll talk about that on another question, I'm sure. Thank you.
Well, as you all know, we have, let's say, 38 campuses, and they're all very, very different. And I've been to all of them. I've talked to the principals about it. And so we have to be very careful about trying to have a single solution that might work at Longwood and at Niceville High School, because those schools are so vastly different. So it's a multifaceted solution, and it has to be predicated on a good threat assessment. And to give the district credit, they're embarking upon a very good threat assessment at every one of our campuses and involving local military and law enforcement to do that. And also to bring in the principals into the conversation to ensure that the solutions that we find for each school are tailored to that school. And there are several approaches, obviously. First of all, most importantly, we have to have a culture of safety within our entire district such that people are willing to see something and then say something when things don't look right. We all obviously have a great SRO program, and the trend towards mental health is a great step for safety. But there are physical means, and obviously we've talked about that, fencing, and trying to limit the number of points of access. If you talk to either Mr. Day or Mr. Morello at two of our big high schools, they say it's virtually impossible at this point in time to have a single point of entry, but we can do what we can to limit the entry. So there are physical means we can do to limit access and close down the number of ways people can get on campuses. There's also technology. Sometimes, and in the military, we use badges which are electronic in nature, and that might help us with controlling access. There are certainly procedures whereby anybody who comes on a campus ought to, one, wear a badge, and two, if they're not a regular attendee at that school, should sign in so that we can control who is on the campuses. And that's been a problem. And my wife being a school principal, we've talked about it at length, about people wandering around. We just can't have anybody on a campus. So I would just say this, once again, the solution to this kind of a problem is not just one of us coming up with a single solution, but rather a collaborative effort among principals and all their stakeholders to come up with solutions tailored to each school.
Thank you, sir. Dr. White?
You know, I think some of you know that I worked for you as a principal at 4 different schools for 26 years, and I have a firsthand real-life experience with school security. And I know how important it is and the kinds of things that have to be done. I would say that I'm so old, I remember when we didn't have SROs in the school and I was a principal. And since that time, we have added SROs. I can tell you from the school board's position, we have doubled the SROs in the high school because we know that that's a serious area. And some of the candidates have already spoken about some of the other kinds of things we've done. Senate Bill 7026 that was just passed this year in the Florida legislature did provide funding for mental health counselors in our schools. And so we have, and I voted in favor of this, so you know, we have employed 12 mental health counselors with a protocol for how their services might be accessed by students and how and what we do with the kinds of information that we get from that, because of course we're very concerned and very interested in that. The other thing that I would point out regarding 7026, that bill did create what I believe Dr. Kelly spoke about, a guardian program. And I will tell you that what the bill says is that every sheriff in every county in Florida, 67 counties, may, the key word, may establish an Aaron Feist guardian program whereby school employees can be armed. Now, it's a long subject, but I will share with you because, of course, as you might imagine, in my role as your school board chairman, I have to understand these things. The 400 hours of training is required to even for a teacher or an individual to even ask to be a part of that program. And the training that's involved to participate in that program is the equivalent of what a deputy sheriff would be required to complete. So I will tell you that our sheriff has chosen not to implement that program. I have said, and I will say publicly, that should our sheriff choose to implement that program, I will be an ardent supporter of that program. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Harmon?
This time, excuse me. You have heard from the constituents on this board. The question that you asked, safety is #1 priority for our Okaloosa County school students. No thumbs about it, no quorum. Safety is #1. Again, we heard about the mental health issues. That's a concern that we got funding for to try to target issues before. I took a class today. I work at one of the schools, you heard him say, I work at one of the schools that's already beyond what the counties can expect. We have the single point entry at Bruner Middle School. We went through the infrastructure of that school. We have concrete walls in that school. That school is one of the safest schools right now in Okaloosa County based on my analysis. But again, there's so much that we can do. You heard some of the constituents say all schools can't be tailored the same. There are different things we have to do for different schools. You heard some wonderful suggestions about drones. So when we talk about some of these things, we have to also look at funding. If you're talking about putting fences around school, we had somebody brought up to us, let's put bulletproof glass in the schools. In the 10 years, you have to replace this glass, and it's just so costly. So again, what our SRO has done today, we have did extensive training on our campus to be prepared for intruders at our school. Again, safety is job one for any school board or any principal in any school. That's her #1 priority, is safety in the school. But to answer your question, safety is #1 priority, and we have to do some things to work on our infrastructure in our schools. Again, what works for Pryor or Bruner might not work for Pryor or Choice Technical College. But again, safety measures have to be put in place to secure the safety of every child of Okaloosa County, not just one school, but every school. But we have to do it in a reasonable way that every school can receive some funding that can meet all the needs at the school for safety. And thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, we have another question.
Hi, I'm Robbie. I live in Niceville. From my years, from 4 years of high school, from 2012 to 2016, I had 3 of my friends commit suicide. My question to you is there going to be a program or some sort of after-school activity implemented to keep kids from, committing suicide and doing stuff like that? So,
all right.
Robbie, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's a really sad situation. As a high school teacher, just having retired, I had that situation with students. It's very sad. As I mentioned in the previous question, I think there's a couple of things. We are getting those mental health counselors because, as you know, you had guidance counselors when you were in school, but you know how busy they were too, don't you? And how challenging it was to get in. Not to say they would not meet with you if you needed that. But now we're going to get counselors who have been trained in mental health issues to work with those students, and that will be a really good thing. And I'd like to see some school organizations where you can work with students and work together as students, because you know that you get more from your fellow students than you really do from the adults there. You know how that works. And in addition, I also know how students are, and they don't want to tell on. If you were one of your friends who is struggling, it'd be hard for you to go and say something about that for fear that you've messed up, it's not quite that, are you betraying a friendship? But I think we need to work on that, Robbie, because we're going to have to do something so that you don't later go, well, we kind of thought something was bothering him, and then you have that to deal with. So if we could get the students involved and start changing that culture so that, like someone said, when you see something and say something, if there's a way you could do it even anonymously, as I mentioned, I think that would go a long way. Okay.
Robbie, I hear your concerns, and they're very close to my heart. My daughter attended Crestview High School the year that there was a snafu with a three-way friendship. Young lady had 2 boyfriends, I guess, and you may remember it made the paper where one trapped the other in the car wash, and they were all shot and killed. And so, of course, our counselors were dispatched, not just from that school, but many schools. So what I say in issues like that, and others as well, our schools are microcosms of society. So whatever is out there is brought into the school. Whether it's a gang, then there's gang-related issues in the school. If it's drugs, there's in the school. So with that, there are also mental health issues, societal pressures, and I know certainly in adolescence years, there's already enough going on hormonally to distress you, but then when you're stressed over other societal issues, we see it manifested in things like cutting and things like teasing about committing suicide and playing the games that we play, that we see students play. My thing is we have to intervene as soon as someone says something. And I read a statistic the other day that upwards of 35% of all students who commit suicide had told someone. They had written it down, they had told a friend, or they had mentioned it in class. I had a student write a poem in my language arts class one time about suicide, never understanding that that was an indication, but now we know. So what I think we need to go back to is make it comfortable for students to tell an adult affiliated with a school. And even if they're teasing, we can't take it in jest. We have to take every clue that we get, because we know statistically that those children have told someone. They've told people. So people knew. So we just need to make it comfortable to tell. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Robbie, thanks for identifying what is obviously a significant problem, and I would even say perhaps an epidemic in our country and certainly in our community, and so we all need to take it seriously, all of us. It's an encouraging sign that we have embarked upon now having 12 new mental health counselors in our district. That's not nearly enough, and I'm sure that the vision is that we will continue to increase that number. And as you all probably know, the purpose of that is not to provide therapy, but rather to provide a professional on our campuses skilled in the ability to identify, based on evidence, if there's a problem of any kind with our students. And I think what has changed, and I think what we all recognize has changed since the tragedies of earlier this year, February 14th, is that now I think we all recognize we all share a responsibility. Once again, something I said earlier is to see something and say something. And that can be done confidentially. But what we can no longer do is to simply tolerate signs which would indicate that somebody is in some form of trouble. That trouble could be a troubled youth who might do harm to others, or a troubled youth who might do harm to themselves. So this notion of having mental health counselors can be used to great effect if we do which is what the district's plan is to identify through a variety of means, and there's a program I believe called MTSS, whereby different forms of evidence can be used to identify a problem. Then the counselors would not be providing any therapy, but they would be able to recommend to either the parent or to an appropriate authority that a student receive the appropriate kinds of therapy. Doing that as a team confidentially and involving the families and the parents, and then providing other possible things like activities to people in trouble, I think is the solution. And I think we're embarking on a path which will get us there, and I'm hopeful, but it's not nearly enough, and we need to continue to work on it, and thank you for raising that very important issue for us.
Yes, sir. Dr. White?
Appreciate the question, and having conducted some of that kind of training that these other candidates have spoken about, we know what has already been said, that when a student talks or writes about the possibility of that, we call that ideation in the research, in the literature, and we know that that's an intervention that must occur. It must occur, and it must occur immediately. It is a national and local tragedy. It's something that we all feel terrible about, and I want the folks here to know that the school district and the school board has taken a strong stance in prevention, and in fact every school has a crisis plan that addresses the subject, teen suicide, that you mentioned to us. I would like to take a moment, though, Charlie, and go back to a previous question that Bob asked about school safety. I know the folks in the audience and maybe the folks watching at home will remember that I spoke about the Aaron Feist Guardian Program and that our sheriff has chosen not to implement that program. I do think it would be important for the audience and folks to know that in Polk County, Florida, in Polk County, the sheriff of Polk County has in fact implemented the Guardian program in Polk County, and so far he believes it will be a striking success. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Harmon.
First of all, Robbie, I thank you for taking your time as a young man to even come to a forum like this to even present that question. A lot of young people your age wouldn't even be able to express that concern, but it is a great concern. You have heard the board members talk about some things that we have put in place. We have mental health counselors that the district has hired. I think it's 12. I think they're going to try to hire an extra one, but we do have 12 that's going to be placed in our schools. But what's the great concern is, based on what you said, you was at the school at the time, the key phrase is see something, say something, and we have to fix it at our school level that students were not afraid to go to their teachers and share. You know, that's one of the biggest concerns that they have. I went to a training just today about abuse, child abuse, and how to identify and check on certain things. But again, there will always be signs. We talk about the Columbine shooting and some of the shootings that's happened around our nation. And before that young man went and shot those kids, he made a video saying this is what he was going to do. It was found on his phone once they found it. And he went and shot about 14 students. But the key fact is that when something like that is going on, and my key focus is, people, if we can learn how to put prayer back in school, put some kind of biblical context back in school. I don't know at Niceville when you was there if they had a worship type program, but some schools now are incorporating. We can't do it as teachers or administrators, but the students can start prayer service. They can have Bible study. They can have things that's going to be tangible to try to reverse some of these bad things that we have going on in our school system. Ms. Lamar brought back up safety. It starts with the basic fundamental Christian values. You know, my grandparents told me when they went to school, they used to carry their guns to school and go hunting after school. So what have we got away from? Only thing that we have got away from in our legislation in our county is Scripture, the Bible. We have gotten away from the Bible, and if we can get that implemented back in, then we'll be able to change some of the things that's happened here in Okaloosa County.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Robbie. You know, it's hard to get up and say what you had to say, but I'm glad you brought it up. And I am so honored to be sitting at a table up here with such fine people that have such good ideas and such big hearts and spirits for the kids. You know, in 1974, the Emergency School Assistance Act, we had busing up north, and I went through training. I just became a certified counselor, and I went through drug counseling to be a drug counselor and a suicide prevention counselor. In 1974, I got that certification. And in the times that I did that, I had 7 different high schools, and I had 19 middle schools, and I was the only counselor that served those. And I would get calls, and was provided a school board car, and I'd go to them. And there was days I went in and somebody was just broke down crying, and somebody would call them and say, "Look, this person needs help." That's what it is. And I've heard the students here, and I've heard Missy Banchik said a beautiful thing about the students, they know, and we need to have student contact. And we had the means then to let people know, and I was hopping from one school to the other. It wasn't an everyday thing, but it was for drug abuse, but it wasn't for the suicides. It is an epidemic. It's in our military. You know, we have, I think it's 22 military, either ex or current military people commit suicide every day. It is an epidemic. But what we have to do, we need to have these mental health counselors, and the 12 that we have, we need to use them. And we need to find out, and if you as a friend see someone, say something. Say it to a teacher. The teacher passes it on. We need to do that. But thank you, young man, for being the person that you are. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else have a question for the candidates?
Two questions. Number one, I'm Connie White. Number one, in November, voters will be asked to vote on Amendment 8, and part of that deals with school board members having just 2 terms. So I'd like to know the candidate's view on the 2 terms. Secondly, appointed or elected superintendents.
Okay. I believe, Ms. Kelly, I believe it's your turn to go first. So.
Well, thank you very much, Connie, for both of those questions. The first one first, on Amendment 8. If you don't know, Amendment 8 really lumps together 3 issues that are relevant to K-12 education. One of those limits term limits for school board members to 2 terms, or 8 years. I am not opposed to that. There is one component of the 3 that are bundled together in that Amendment 8 that does give me concern, and that is the one where charter schools may be ordained by the state without permission of the school board. So since they are bundled together, I would have to vote no on the total Amendment 8. And so does that answer your question? It has more to it, but that's just a quick and direct answer for that component of Amendment 8. It has other tentacles in there. So read Amendment 8, the proposed Amendment 8 Constitution. The second part of her question was appointed or elected superintendent. And I've stated many times before, never until recently, in my now 40 years of education and working with schools and school districts, now I own my own consulting company now and consult in districts around us, you would never have heard me say that I would be in favor of even investigating anything other than an elected superintendent, because I've personally worked for 7 of those elected superintendents. But as things are today, and as the experience we've had today bears out the fact that we don't always have someone with whom we have the greatest of public trust and public interest. So now I'm of the opinion that we should put it on a referendum for the voters to decide if they think in our district they would like to see us with an elected or appointed superintendent. Having an appointed superintendent would give us some variety in how we might deal with inappropriate activities. Thank you.
Great 2-part question, Connie. Thank you. First of all, on Amendment 8, I think Dr. Kelly said it exactly right. We have 3 things on there, and it makes it harder for us to. But I actually am in favor of term limits. Over time, I've come to believe that we tend, without term limits, to develop a class of professional politicians in our country, and that part of the solution to that is term limits. If you remember back, to maybe some people were alive, we had no term limit on our president, and that was changed by constitutional amendment to limit our president to 2 terms. And I really think that's probably a wise choice, including our school board. So I'm supportive of term limits, but I'm not supportive of the rest of that amendment, just so you know. But that's not part of the question. Now, as far as elected versus appointed, I'm gonna stick with what I've been saying ever since the start. So I've not changed my view on that. And I really firmly believe that for constitutional officers such as our superintendent, that an elected superintendent is the way to go. And here's my rationale. In a democratic republic, as we're in, I like to think that the people have as much of a role in selecting their representatives as possible. And I hate the thought of taking the prerogative and the sovereignty of our voters away from them and putting decisions about who is representing them in the hands of a small group of people. Not only that, however, I've done a lot of research on this for the past 6 or 7 months. And that, first of all, appointing a superintendent is a very expensive proposition. Now, I realize that money is not the only criterion, but the fact of the matter is you're going to pay if you want to bring someone in from outside. And unfortunately, it's no guarantee of success, because the evidence, and I've read it recently, is mixed on whether you get better or not so better superintendents from appointing versus electing. And the fact of the matter is it's no panacea to say that we could appoint and get a better outcome. And in fact, in some cases, it poses a problem, because if you don't like it, you're going to pay the person anyway, whether you fire them or not. So I'm going to retain my view that we need to elect our superintendent.
Okay, Dr. White.
Reverend Sansom, Connie, you could have at least told me you were going to ask the question. All right. Well, let me say, first of all, regarding Amendment 8, and because it will not be a matter that comes before the school board to vote, the sunshine laws do not prohibit me from stating my particular opinion and how I will vote personally on Amendment 8. So I will vote against Amendment 8 primarily because it moves away some of the power from your local school boards to the state of Florida, particularly in terms of charter schools, and I'm in favor of local control. And in terms of term limits, that's not an issue for me. I said the first time that I ran for this office, before you good folks elected me, that if you did elect me the first time for 4 years, and should I seek another 4-year term, and should you elect me again in a re-election, that I would only serve 8 years anyway. So with me, you get automatic term limits anyway. In terms of an appointed or an elected superintendent, I too would have found it hard to believe that I would ever favor anything other than an elected superintendent. However, recent experience has convinced me that there are some advantages, actually some immense advantages that accrue to an appointed superintendent. Does anyone know, just out of curiosity, what the Florida law says the qualifications are to run for school superintendent? None. You get what you get. However, should you have an appointed superintendent, you could establish criteria. You could have criteria established to be an an appointed superintendent. Beyond that, you could also establish performance metrics, performance expectations for the appointed superintendent. None of those exist now.
Thank you.
Mr. White, term limits, again, I'm in favor of term limits. There, again, was mentioned there's 3 different parts on it. For is a person being in the office for 8 years or 2 terms. I think that would suffice because we can generate new ideas in it. So I think you all done heard that across the board. But on the other question that Mr. Lamar tried to explain to us so elegantly was elected or appointed. Again, what he was trying to say to us, right now you have the right to vote for your superintendent. You have the right to vote. But if someone was to appoint that superintendent, he said, we get what we get, but if we have to go out and right now it's probably going to be hard for us to relinquish Mrs. Superintendent. I won't call names. It's going to be hard for us to let our superintendent go now because she was elected. But if she was appointed, or if a person was appointed, you can fire them for not meeting expectations. But again, I still think the power should be to the people to elect whoever they want to elect for office. And again, I stand on that. For the sake of time, I'll leave my response to that. But I'm for election for elected superintendent, and I do go with Amendment 8 for term limits.
Okay, I'm going to do the amendment kind of quick. They've summed it up really well. It has 3 parts. The first part's about the term limits. If someone is already currently holding an office, they're not held to that 8 years. It would come after the election. So if Dr. Lamar decided he wanted to run again after this time, he would still have that availability. I have researched that. So he would actually be able to have 12. As far as, and no one's talked about it, no, I didn't hear it, about the civics. That's the middle part about the civics, and we do teach civics in this county. And that is, and those first two things I'm totally in favor of. Then they're trying to sneak in on us about the charter schools and relinquishing our ability to make the decisions in our own county. I am going to vote no on that Amendment 8 because of that charter school thing that comes creeping in at the end. Now, about the appointed or elected superintendents. When I was in high school, Dr. Van Hoos was my principal. The year after I graduated, he ran for school board, and he was on the school board for 24 years. He was the superintendent of the schools, and that's what they did. And I remember when they switched from him and they went to the appointed. And at that time, I was put on a staff of about 40 or 41. I think there was 41 educators, and I had just finished my master's degree in specialist education. And we solicited That's the only way to say it. People to come from other states, and we wound up with the best candidates, people with the credentials, the experience, everything that we needed. And now I think they're on the 7th or 8th one up there now, but they keep renewing the contracts. It is a year-to-year contract. So when you talk about how much it is to buy them out, yeah, if you decide you're going to fire them in September, you're going to pay for the rest of that contract year. But I am totally in favor of appointed superintendents, because with an election, someone that couldn't even be a dog catcher could win, and you would have them as your superintendent.
Okay, so I'm last on this. You know, I was sitting here thinking, you know the term bundling that Cox uses when on your cable? Well, our legislatures must like that term, because what they're doing is bundling a lot of things into these amendments. And so in Amendment 8, like you've heard, I'm worried because I don't think our public knows that they bundled it. You know, maybe you don't want the internet, and so you want this piece of the bundle, but you got to get the whole thing, and that's what Amendment 8 does. Now, just like the others, just not to sound like I'm mimicking, but yeah, I can go along with term limits. I understand that. And also the civics piece, which, by the way, Okaloosa County never stopped. We have taught civics, and we have taught American government in our schools, all the way back to, you know, when I was going to school. So I'm going to have to vote no on Amendment 8, and I hope that you will educate your neighbors and friends on that, because you really can do term limits, just vote us out of office. So the other two pieces, though, one already exists, and the other one, we don't want to relinquish our control over the schools. All right, the next thing, I'm kind of like the others, having been here and grown up a long time. I always voted, I believe in democracy, but what we've had to suffer through, and I mean that term, suffer through the last year with this situation, has led me to believe that we need to look at appointing a superintendent. The other piece is that the voter turnout has become so low in Okaloosa County that are we really letting the voters put that person in the job? Not really. 23% is what we might get. A quarter of the people are going to put a person in that office. So how much are we really losing? And I think we could gain if we have an appointed one. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Let me first take this opportunity as one of the host pastors to thank you all for coming this evening and sharing your thoughts and your views as the questions have been presented. I do have a question. And Dr. Kelly, you made a statement a moment ago that our school systems are a microcosm of the community and the society that we live in. And I know it was also stated a moment ago as it pertains to the questions that were handed out, you know, what your views are when it comes to certain social things like homosexuality, abortion, and that kind of thing. And though you may not be in the position to make public policy as it regards to those types of things, you may very well be asked to make policy as it reflects to the curriculum and other things in our school system, as our school systems, public school systems, often are a target for some of these types of social and social progressive trends and changes. So with that statement, the question I have is, with the current social landscape of progressive liberalism, how will you, as a gatekeeper of our school system, rule on issues such as transgenderism, gender neutrality, homosexuality, those types of things that conflict with biblical principles as it impacts school curriculum and student-faculty policies?
All right, Dr. McAllister.
Well, I'm glad we saved that one for me to start off with. All right. Well, yeah. This is a good question, and I respect the question, and I've thought about this. So my belief is that our school system has a fairly well defined role in teaching our students and preparing them for whatever transpires after the 12th grade. That's either college or a vocation, which I strongly support, by the way, the vocational side. I've said it in other forums that another aspect is to provide an enrichment to our students in terms of extracurriculars and other things which engage them and give them other values. The part you're talking about, to me, gets into an area of values education. And I believe that we should teach values, but I think that the role of many of the values that I believe you speak about is the province of our families, our churches, and our agencies and organizations outside of school. I'm not saying schools should be devoid of having values. In fact, I've argued that we say the pledge, we put in God we trust in our schools, and we ought to allow prayer in school. But when it comes to trying to teach things that relate to some of the issues you brought up, I would really prefer that we work hard as a society to strengthen our families, strengthen our culture, and rely on our other institutions to focus on teaching values of behavior according to biblical principles. And let our schools focus on the tremendously difficult and humongous task of educating our students in a variety of subjects, including extracurriculars, that prepare them for their careers, either at college or in vocations. So I would prefer that we didn't attempt to burden our schools with more in terms of teaching too much of the values that you speak of. That's just my viewpoint.
Dr. White?
From that end and come this way. All right. Well, Reverend Sansom, I appreciate the question, and I would say that I'd like to think that by now this community knows that I am a fundamentalist, conservative Christian. Now, when I say that, the consequence is that at this juncture we must follow the law as it has been given to us. And in fact, we have been subject to some activist, liberal judges in terms of rulings. And in fact, they've made law which really, in my opinion, was outside of their prerogative. But to make a long story short, I think if you really want to look at my background, take a look at those people who have endorsed my candidacy. I'm not allowed to discuss my political party affiliation, but by law I am allowed to discuss with you political activities I've been involved in. And so I think I've already told you that in 2016 and 2017, I received the Okaloosa Republican Club's Most Valuable Politician Award. And I was the first two-time winner for that. My candidacy has been endorsed by the Niceville Republican Federated Organization, and it's also been endorsed by the Okaloosa Republican Women Federated Association. And so when I say that to you, I say that to you because amongst those folks and amongst the folks that know me, that know my life and what I've stood for and what I've tried to do for you and the children and the teachers and the parents that I've worked for all of these years, I have demonstrated my strong Christian conservative values, and my life demonstrates that as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we will take one more question from the audience, and then, oh, I'm sorry.
Just thought those were two great answers.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Go, Mr. Harmon.
Try
please
to respond to that
go
question
ahead.
real quick and briefly,
Yes.
Pastor Sampson. The question that you seek to look for an answer for God, sir, is that we should but we should always look to God for our guidance. For those Christian conservatives that's in the building, we know that based on Scripture, that homosexuality and those type of things are not right in the sight of God, just that simple. But Jesus loved those people, and we have to love them too, but we still should be able to tell them and guide them in the right direction in which way they should go. And again, I went to theology school down in Graceville, Florida for like 3 years, and again, there's nothing more important to me in my life today than trying to teach young people the right values in life, Christian values. Again, we know that things come up in schools these days, everything from drug relations to we got some questions on here about how do we look at condoms and things of that in the schools. Should we give, again, we have to, Mr. Lamar inverted to, that we have to do what the law says. And the law says we can't do certain things, like we can't talk about Christ in the school system. I worked with a reading teacher last year, and she had one verse in her reading passage that spoke about God, and she threw the whole passage away. And I felt so bad that she had to do that, or that she did that, because if we can't talk about God, we're really going to be doomed. Our society is just going to continue to go down. But anyway, I hope I answered your question. I know that you were alluding to something more deeper, but I would not try to have that in school. We shouldn't teach those kind of things because it's not biblically.
Yes, just a few years ago, when I was in the classroom, I had a student come up and ask me to pray with them. And after the class, I prayed with him. It was over at Shoal River. I prayed with him, and then we were by ourselves, and this young man was praying for his grandfather. About 2 weeks later, I got a summons to the past superintendent, okay? And we met at a church, and there was a meeting there. She was talking about different things, but she asked me to come to that meeting. And at that meeting, there was 2 attorneys, and they asked me, "Do you talk about Jesus in class?" And I said, "I do." And they said, "Well, you're not supposed to do that." And I said, "But if a student asks you, do you believe in Jesus, you can answer that. You can respond to it." And I used to wear a cross all the time because I was a chaplain, and they would ask me about that. And I remember I had a young man in my emotionally behavior disturbed class that professed to be a homosexual. And he came one day on the bus wearing a skirt, go-go boots, that's what I'm going to call them, white go-go boots, and a blouse. And he came into the classroom. I remember the SRO said, "Wait till you see this young man." I remember his name, but I won't say it. And he came in. I totally ignored that he was dressed that way the whole day. And he went, the next day he came back wearing blue jeans and stuff. He said, "Dr. Slusser, I don't know, but did you even notice me yesterday?" And I said, "But I think you were just expressing yourself." I'm not going to push my values on the children, but we can exemplify the values that we have in front of them and say, this is what we believe we should be doing. And, not put anyone down for what they decide to do. And in our world, there's always going to be discourse. But, like he said, Mr. Harmon said, Jesus loved everyone. We need to love them. And by loving them, maybe we can persuade them to the right way.
So I taught American literature. And, the law says I can't really speak about religion, as a teacher, but you can't teach American literature without speaking about religion. And so, I was looking at Mr. Sanson, and you knew me as a teacher. This first question on the pamphlet even talks about, should you teach these main things of reading and grammar and all that, or should you teach the other things? But what I saw as a teacher, I just integrated it all. I can tell you that my students knew my values, knew I was a Christian, knew what I was about, not because I stood up and said it in those words, but because of the way I taught and by the way I worked with them. And that's the way I would be as a board member. You don't have to necessarily carry the big sign. It's what you do. It's your actions that speak, that people can see. And I believe that's what we're talking about here. And so when you ask the question, how are you going to work with these things? I can't change my values. They're ingrained in me, and I've already explained to you what those are. So I'll, as a board member, be looking at that from that viewpoint. Of course, always in mind, what is the best thing for the students of this district? So that's my answer to you, Mr. Sanson. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. And I really do believe it's in my DNA to understand the workings of schools and students and teaching and learning. and go back to Robbie's question as well. But the idea of social progressive liberalism and how would we deal with it, or how would we vote, or what ideas are floating through our head, I've tried to incorporate in my answer some of the other questions that you had there, so you can see where I'm coming from. I happen to know that FS, that's Florida Statute, Section 103.46, does address part of your question to a degree, in that we can teach certain things within certain courses. For instance, that particular section speaks to abstinence within a standard of health education. And to another point that's been made, the real separation of church and state, we can talk about doctrines, particularly if you're teaching art, literature, American history, comparative political systems, because your culture and your religion impact your symbolism and your literature and how you express yourself. So you have to talk about it, but the key word is about it. We talk about them. We do not teach doctrine, and we do not teach to persuade or to convict a student. That has to be in the separation of church and state. Regardless of how we feel personally, that's in there. In the teaching profession, we have what is called the Code of Ethical Conduct for Professional Educators. And while we will not teach or be proponents of topics of homosexuality and alternative lifestyles, we are inclusive of every student, because it is our directive to teach students. And I go back to my 3 C's, and the first one on that was care. We care about the individual, and it is our moral imperative to teach every student that comes into our school buildings. And I do have some special stories about those that I've lived and I could share with you. But my goal and my vision is to prepare our students to be healthy, successful, productive members of society. Thank you.
All right. I want to thank the audience for your participation tonight. We're going to ask the school board members 2 more questions. The last question will basically give you an opportunity to let everyone know why they should vote for you. So here's a question, and we'll use your suggestion, Dr. White. We'll start with Dr. McAllister and go, and then the last one we'll start with you, coming the other way. All right. So here's the question: what are the most important issues facing the holders of your office over the next decade, and how do you plan to address them?
Well, I've talked about a couple issues that are smaller than I want to say in this particular answer. There are 2 major issues that I believe. The first major issue is that there are issues out there that we need to address as a school system that threaten the excellence of our school and the safety of our children. And I talked about those, but the overall issue is that as a board, my belief is that the board has the statutory authority and the prerogative to work in conjunction with the school district to solve these big issues. And I think that our mandate going forward is to attack things like growth and infrastructure and school safety and mental health. The second, perhaps more important, as I've walked around thousands of homes, is how will we restore the faith, confidence, and trust in the leadership of our school system? That is on almost every citizen's mind now. Safety is still important, but they tend to bring that up. Okay, so those are the 2 major things that I view how I would enter into this office and the things that I would want to do. And how do I attack those? Well, one, I bring a set of skills that are very well suited to solving big problems like the ones I've talked about. So you've heard me talk about collaborative problem solving, strategic thinking, long-term vision, and those things, and I believe that's the way to attack these big problems. But the second of them is more challenging, and that is restoring the faith, confidence, and trust of our citizens in our school system, in the leadership of our school system. And how do we do that? Well, one is to actually do something and actually satisfy their desire for us to attack problems and be successful at doing it. The other, though, is to be candidates of integrity. I've had 47 years of unblemished integrity, starting with when I took the oath of office for the first time and pledged to the Honor Code at the Air Force Academy. And I've lived a life of honor and integrity, honesty, and ethics. And I believe by being a candidate who has done that throughout my entire life, that will be a good first step in restoring the faith, confidence, and trust in the leadership of our school system.
Well, that is a wonderful question, and I believe you said, what are the most important issues over the next decade and how we would seek to address those. So the two most important issues that come to my mind are really commingled, and I've said before, they almost have a symbiotic relationship. You almost cannot separate these two. When you speak about school safety and our aging infrastructure, those to me are the two things we're going to have to address and may even take a decade to get everything we want done in both of those realms. When I first put together my brochures, which I hope all of you take one if you haven't already, back in August of 2016, actually designed the end of July 2016, I have on there safety concerns well before some of the most recent shootings and issues. But I was really talking about inside and outside the school, because a lot of our safety concerns are inside. Student-on-student aggression, suicide, as Robbie pointed out for us, many of those things happen internally that we need to address, as well as safety concerns from an outside threat, an intruder, or those other things. Along with that, you have to look at the infrastructure, because the design of a school, and I tell you, I've been principal of both a ramp school with lots and lots of exterior doors and an internal school that had very few external doors. And you would look at safety and security of two different designs of schools very differently. So to me, school safety and infrastructure have to go hand in hand. And our school district does have a strategic plan for how we would address infrastructure needs. The missing piece is, of course, the dollars. How would we fund it? And that, of course, goes to the public trust issue and the sales tax issue. We have to regain the public trust to do that. I've been a principal in all three zones of our district, North, Central, and South. And I believe I'm still a highly regarded, well-respected leader in all three of those communities. And I believe I could help us regain the public trust in that venue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I agree with some of the items that they were talking about. Certainly, we do have a trust issue that we need to work on. But let me bring up a couple of things that I haven't really heard tonight. Dr. Kelly mentioned it a little bit, and that has to do with financing our schools and all the things that we need to do. And as you know, you've heard the news about the half-cent sales tax. And unfortunately, in my opinion, we do not have on the referendum this year that half-cent sales tax to help our schools. And we're going to, as a board, if I'm on the board or whoever's on the board, is going to have to address how they're going to do some funding of things that are going to have to be fixed and so forth, even though that money's not coming in. So that is a big issue. But another issue is we need to be looking at particularly our teachers. We have a teacher shortage. The state of Florida has a teacher shortage. You may have seen on the news the other day that over 1,000 teachers in Florida that were currently working and they were on a temporary status failed the teacher test. They had to let them go. So we are seeing that happen. I know growing up here in Okaloosa, and this is such a great district, and when I came to teach here, I was told, wow, if you can get a teaching job in Okaloosa, you've got it made. And it was hard to get in to teach at the time. Mrs. White knows we went in at the same time there. And so we don't have that problem anymore. And it's not even just numbers the problem, but you know, you can get people, you got to have quality people. It starts in the classroom, ladies and gentlemen. That is the core of our district and goes from there. And so we need to be addressing what we're going to do about training of our employees and getting the best teachers we can with your students, with your children. That's our future. And I think that's something we've not talked a lot about, and I see it as a concern, particularly in the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Not done yet. Okay. In the next 5 to 10 years, you know, we talked about safe and secure schools. That's an urgent thing. The infrastructure, some of the schools are they're so old they're just falling apart. The teacher shortage that Ms. Ivanchik brought up is highly a problem. People used to go to college and become teachers, and that was their goal. And now less and less are entering the schools of education in all our major colleges. They're choosing to go other ways, whether it be a technology career or some other career into business. But we're having less and less choosing to become teachers. One of the reasons is the lack of respect for teachers and the lack of pay. You know, Florida is one of the lowest paying for teachers in the entire. Now, Okaloosa County, compared to the surrounding counties, is pretty decent. But over in Escambia County, they've been beating the bushes right the past couple of weeks trying to find teachers to fill those positions. And in Alabama, some of them have came across from other areas over to Baldwin County, because Baldwin County over there, just across the border, they pay a little bit more. We have to be concerned about teachers. And the thing we need to do, the money we find to fix the schools, to make them safer, to hire the teachers, to reward the teachers that are already here and the staff. We're shortchanging on our bus drivers, the funding. We can't get the bus drivers. You know, and I'm trying to be dismal, but we need to find a way. That half-cent sales tax has been wonderful. Escambia County just opened up. This week, they're opening up Beulah Elementary School, and Beulah Middle is going to open up in December. They did that with the half-cent sales tax. We can do the same thing, not raise property taxes at all, but go for that half-cent sales tax, which about 27 to 45% of that comes from our tourism. We need to do this. Those are the concerns that we have. Each and every person up here knows the concerns, and I know that the public just needs to understand that this is something we have to address within the next 5 to 10 years, if not sooner.
Okay, excellent question again. One of my main concerns would be, is that I would want to improve safety and increase accountability. Somebody has to be accountable, so accountability would be very important to me. I would like to help restore the school board to its proper function as an oversight body of the administration, which I think we have lost in the last few years. And I say that because the board is really an oversight of the administration of the school district, the superintendent. We have heard things about improving infrastructure. We have heard about the half-cent sales tax. And I seen some people nodding their head about the half-cent sales tax. A lot of people would not vote for that because we want to know, what is Okaloosa County doing with the money and the funding that we have now? But the half-cent sales tax will be needed within the next 4 or 5 years, because all of our schools, we've got schools 30 years old, 40 years old, that needs infrastructure. We got to have some stuff done to improve our schools. They want to go build a wing on Destin Middle School. Before we can add a wing to Destin Middle School, we need to take care of Nicefield High School, Crestview High School, Fort Walton Beach High School. So these are things that will have to be addressed. But again, before the people will vote for a half-cent sales tax, they have to know why we have to have that half-cent sales tax. They have to know that our schools need it. It's not that, the funding has been misappropriated, but the money has to be accounted for, and we have to do that at some point. But this school year, we know it's not on the ballot, but in the future, it's going to have to be addressed, because if we don't have the funding to fix our schools, we got schools now that's closing down. It's almost like churches. Churches are dying out. Schools are closing down because they can't afford to fix them. What are we going to do? Our kids are, getting bused to overpopulated schools. They're not education. We're having problems hiring teachers already. It's just so much that needs to be done. And if I'm on that board, I promise you I'll try to address most of these issues that we are bringing to our attention.
Well, I just can't help but respond to some of that. I guess the first thing is I would ask the audience, when you have an opportunity after this meeting, to ask Mr. Harmon to tell you in which Florida statute does he find the term or the direction that the school board is to exercise what he called oversight. Now, I will say to you that the school board has been proactive and has passed policies that were necessary to provide direction to the school district. But I want to return to the question and the issues that we face over the next decade. Of course, a primary issue is one of funding. And then a secondary issue that tags right along with funding is student growth. A lot of folks don't know that just last year we added over 1,000 students to the Okaloosa school system. We have some huge developments going in our area. 1,200 homes soon going into Niceville. You may have seen the article in the newspaper that in our sister counties next door, they'll be adding 120,000 homes in one particular development. And the consequence of that is that we face issues associated with growth, and when you grow, you have expenses in terms of creating classrooms, adding additional buses, and so forth. Now, when you ask a question about issues that we face, and I would point out, I don't mind sharing my testimony to this group. And I will say, Jonathan, to answer your question, to go back to your question, there is no question that we do face a struggle with liberal progressivism, or what you and I know as scholars, we call it humanism. And that's a real struggle that we're going to have to deal with over the next decade. And right now, I'll tell you, there is a struggle between good and evil in the world. And as Christians, we know that. And we know how the story ends, and we know what we have to do.
All right. We want to thank you, candidates, for taking your time to be here tonight. You guys have done an excellent job, all of you, and we thank you. We're going to give you an opportunity. We're going to give each of you a minute to just make a campaign speech and tell the audience why we should vote for you. And so, Dr. White, we'll start with you.
All right, Reverend Sampson, thank you. I guess what I would want the folks to know is that I care about Okaloosa County and the Okaloosa County school system. You've known me. I've lived here and worked amongst you and played sports with you and coached and taught and run your schools for you for, well, really longer than my opponents have been alive. And I think that all during that time, I hope that I've led the kind of life and done the kinds of things that that you would expect from me as one of your leaders. I will tell you that my campaign has been endorsed financially by hundreds of Okaloosa citizens, and they've contributed. And I am the right person for the job. You can compare my credentials to my opponents. You can compare my experiences to my opponent. You can compare my ideas, and you can compare my successes. And I think from that, you should be able to tell that I am, in fact, the right person to be reelected to the school board. Vote for Lamar White. Thank you.
Thank you. I first want to go back, and when I shared about being an oversight for the district, I found that in Chapter 1, the governance and operation policies of the Okaloosa County School District. I want to let you know that is in the records because that's on our school board policy. And if Mr. Lamar White would have read that, he would have known that that's there. But I want to get that cleared first. Now, yes, sir. I'll let you read it as I explain why I should be the #1 candidate. The reason I would make the best candidate is, first, I would like for the children to get a quality education in our public school system. When asked, and I considered, and I thought very hard about what made me the best candidate. See, I attended schools in Okaloosa County back in the early 70s. I graduated in 81 from our public schools, not prepared for college. A week later, I joined the military, joined the U.S. Army. When I returned to the county, seeing the same things going on in our school district, kids graduating with no direction, my goal is to make sure children in Okaloosa County have a choice to either go to a trade school, a junior college, four-year college, and I plan on doing this by helping the county get more qualified educators, by working to increase salaries to help lure in more qualified teachers who want to teach. If appointed by the community to the school board, I will help provide the necessary opportunities that students need to reach their full potential. And again, I thank you for your vote in August 28th for your school board District 1. Thank you so very much.
I've mailed out literature, and it looks like this. And I had a couple stop me today and ask me if I would help them fill out their ballot. They were two of my neighbors, new neighbors. But they got this in the mail because they asked for absentee ballot. It says on the back of this, you can make an educated choice. That's what it's all about. Who are you going to put in that chair? You know, I've got two opponents. One of them's not here tonight. But you need to look and do a comparison. Who has the experience and why are they running? Why are they doing this? And it's not a job that I'm looking for. I've had plenty of jobs in the past. When you read this, you'll see that I have. It's a mission. And I believe that I need to be on the board to help put conservative Christian values. When I ran the last time in 2014, and there were some discrepancies from my other opponent, you know, I was referred to in the paper as the crazy Christian, and I shared that with some people earlier tonight. If they called me the ugly Christian, the old Christian, the stupid Christian, at least they had the right last name there. I appreciate it. Look at this and get it on my table over there, and I'd be glad and be privileged to represent you on the school board in District 3.
1 year ago tomorrow, I became a candidate for this position. It was just 2 months after I ended my career from the classroom as a classroom teacher. And in this year, I've learned a lot of things. And what I've learned from voters that I've spoken with and our citizens is that you're looking for a person with character. And we've talked a lot about character tonight. You're looking for also a person with the credentials. I want you to know that not only do I have a Florida teaching certificate, which is active and will be good my entire term, I am one of very few teachers that has a national teacher certificate. And that's like just a small percentage of those in the nation that have that. And I was in the first group of Okaloosa County teachers to get that certificate. You also want someone that has commitment. Well, you can't see much more commitment than 38 years in the classroom. I chose to stay in the classroom because that's where the action is and that's where I wanted to be. So those things are what people are telling me that they want. So let me say that I trust you to make the right decision. I believe in the democratic process, and I want to leave you with hope. Hold on to positive expectations for this election and for Okaloosa County Schools. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I started out tonight by saying that I am Dr. Diane Kelly, your experienced choice for School Board District 5. And by that experienced, I'm talking about specific, hands-on, roll-up-your-sleeves, in the classroom, in the schools, authentic school experience. More than 36 years in our schools as a classroom teacher, as a school principal, and a district-level leader. I have the highest credentials possible. I have a doctorate degree in educational leadership, a specialist in curriculum and instruction, and a master's in ed leadership. I'm certified in 6 areas, and I've taught and worked in all 6 areas. I've also worked with ESE through advanced. But I want to leave you with one thought. Since we are in a Christian format, one of my supporters that I only met through this year sent me this license plate or this tag, and it said, "Keep the faith, vote," Exodus 18:21. And if you don't know what that says, it is, "But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s." So I hope you keep that uppermost in your mind when you vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I wish to represent you on your school board, use my skills and expertise and experience as a strategic thinker and a problem solver to make a positive contribution to our school district, which is so important to us. I've had the opportunity to develop a very deep understanding of how our school system works, and I'm married to somebody who's deeply involved as a school principal. But most importantly, in this election, you're hiring candidates who have the integrity to restore your complete faith, trust, and confidence in the leadership of your school system. For over 4 decades, during full careers as a military officer and a commander, industry executive, and a tireless volunteer in our schools, I've been faithful to the many oaths of office I've taken and to my vows of marriage. Been faithful to my God, to my country, my family. You see, integrity is earned, but it's easily forfeited, and mine's intact. And it's demonstrated over decades of faithfulness, honesty, and ethical behavior. So, a vote for Brand McAllister on the 28th of August is a vote for integrity, trust, and faithfulness. Thank you.
All right. Well, once again, we want to thank all the candidates. Audience, let's give these candidates a great big hand. thank you so much for coming and being with us tonight. It's been an honor to have you here. I want you to know that we greatly respect your willingness to be a candidate and to run for office. Our constitutional republic would be in great trouble without people like you. Thank you to all of you. And to that, we will say good night and God bless you. Thank you for coming.